Okay, so we're starting in medias res here, as Aristotle advised in the Poetics. I'm Jeffrey Gross.
And I'm Valerie Stivers.
And we are Fretful Porpentine, the podcast. And what is Fretful Porpentine?
I have no idea.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll end it right here, folks, because I don't either. No, the world's shortest podcast. We talk about books and music and the relationship between the two. And I think, Valerie, you were just scolding me for something, and you wanted to make sure that was captured on the tape.
So today's episode is on the Kreutzer Sonata, which is a piece of music of some kind that Jeffrey will explain by Beethoven, and also a Tolstoy short story that is one of the greatest short stories of all time, in my opinion. However, we just were learning that there's a second Kreutzer Sonata that we were going to talk about, but we're not prepared to do that.
Well, I'm not sure that it really is that important to talk about because the main kind of interaction here is between Tolstoy and Beethoven.
Yeah, but I was interested in the derivative work. What's the other one? Tell us what the other one is, at least.
The other one, yeah.
A piece of music, not a book.
Yes. Oh, that thing. Yes.
Yes,
well,
that thing that we were going to research before we started our show, but I guess here we are.
This is the scolding part of the podcast, folks. We always do. It's kind of a ritual. Yeah. So there is a string quartet by a modern, I might say modern in quotes, quote unquote, modern classical music, meaning not contemporary, but 20th century classical music, Czech composer named Leoš Janáček. And he wrote a string quartet, which is called, for reasons, the Kreutzer Sonata, even though it's not a sonata.
And isn't that totally interesting? And in fact, for how many months have we delayed recording this podcast so that we could research this very fact?
We can't.
Yet here we are recording, and the fact has not been researched. And this is so interesting. I mean, I want to know what Janáček's weird modernist Kreutzer Sonata is. Do you have it at least?
I do.
Okay, so we'll listen to it, and without research, we'll tell people about it as we go here.
We'll talk about it a little bit. I mean, I'm not sure.
You'll have to be like insightful on the fly since you don't actually know about it.
I see. Okay. Can I just make stuff up blatantly?
No, I said insightful on the fly.
Okay, so look, we're going to talk mainly about the Beethoven Kreutzer Sonata, which is one of Beethoven's most famous works, and for good reason, and which was written in 1803. And now I get to chide you a little bit because the Tolstoy is a novella, right? It's not a short story.
I mean, as far as I know, it's a short story. You think it's a novella?
Yeah, it's about 75 pages long. Don't you think it's too short to be a novel and too long to be a short story?
I'm going to look this up as we speak. You can, while I'm looking this up, and I'm quite sure it's a short story, and that we will prove Jeffrey wrong
it's
here once again. While I'm looking this up, explain to people what a sonata is, please, because I have no idea.
Yeah, well, sonata is one of those words. It's personally painful to me that classical music does have jargon that sort of gets in the way of the enjoyment of it. And I'm all about seducing people into the enjoyment of classical music. And sonata is one of those phrases. It comes from the verb to sound. So a sonata is a piece that is sounded by instruments as opposed to a cantata, which is from cantare, which means to sing. So a sonata is basically an instrumental piece. And the thing is that the meaning of the word sonata evolved over time. So that by the time you get to Beethoven's time, a sonata was either a piano by itself, which would be a piano sonata, of which Beethoven wrote 32, or it would be piano and some other instrument, right? So a violin sonata is piano and violin, right? Cello sonata is piano and cello. It's not particularly complicated. It's in the same sort of 3 or 4 movement structure as like a symphony or a concerto, where normally, although not always, normally you would have, a fast movement and then a slow movement and then maybe some sort of transitional movement like a scherzo, and then you'd have a finale. So, and the Kreutzer Sonata, in fact, has 3 movements: fast, slow, fast.
And so the difference between the sonata and the symphony is that the symphony has more instruments, but the basic form of the pieces is sort of similar.
Yes.
Okay. I think that's actually really sort of empowering to understand that a cantata is a sung piece and a sonata is an instrument piece.
Yeah.
It's like easy to remember, and all of a sudden things that have always been vague become clear.
And one of the things that's interesting about the Kreutzer Sonata is that as these forms evolved, from the Baroque and then into what's called the classical period, which again is kind of confusing because you're like, well, I thought it was all just like classical music. Well, yeah, it's all classical music, but you have the Baroque and then there's the quote unquote classical period and then there's the Romantic period. And actually Beethoven is the pivot, sort of the transitional figure from classicism into Romanticism. And in fact, I'm glad I'm saying all these things because they do sort of point us back towards the Kreutzer Sonata as embodying the first seeds of a sort of feverish and expressive and subjective romanticism while still having the rigor of classical forms.
And this is actually incredible because Tolstoy's main contention about this piece of music is that it makes you horny.
In a word. Yes. Yes.
Would you say that's true, Jeffrey? I have not heard the Kreutzer Sonata yet, so I do not have a personal way to tell. But you have listened to it many times. Does it make people horny?
Let's talk a little bit about this Tolstoy fellow of yours. Okay, since he was obviously, and forgive me for lapsing into like sort of literary critical jargon, he was obviously kind of a nut job.
I knew nut job was the word that was coming.
Well, I was going to say nutbag, but I think nut job is really sort of better.
So
what does Tolstoy think of the Kreutzer Sonata, Valerie? In the Kreutzer Sonata?
Well, so I deeply disagree that Tolstoy is a nut job, and this is, I guess, this is where the true reality of me and my brain comes out, because Tolstoy is one of my favorite writers, and not for the early stuff. I mean, obviously War and Peace and Anna Karenina are amazing novels, and many say the greatest novels ever written, but for me it's the totally whacked out later philosophical and sort of religious and moral work that gets to be really, really exciting. And everyone dismisses Tolstoy as crazy, and I just don't think it's true. I think he was a visionary, and I think his moral vision and his understanding of humanity, I mean, obviously it's very challenging, and that's why everyone wants to dismiss him, but no, not a nut job.
Yeah, I mean, it's very complex. First of all, I want to say that it's been a long time since I've read any Tolstoy besides this Kreutzer Sonata novella, but it's a fantastically written work. I mean, it's utterly brilliant. And it's clear that in the most skillful ways possible, many of them quite sort of surreptitious, Tolstoy has his thumb on the scales the entire time. And he's trying to seduce us into this vision using the main character. What's his name again?
The story, so the Kreutzer Sonata, the basic format of the story is that an unnamed narrator is on a train and he starts talking to a man named Posnyshev. It's like he's using, it's the Russian root on this name is late. So he's sort of showing that this character like figured things out late, but it's not, I don't think it's a very natural word in Russian. Like I keep struggling to be like, how do you pronounce this?
It seems odd.
I don't think it would be really, I don't think it would exist like that in Russian. But anyway, our narrator starts speaking to a man on the train, and the man on the train tells him the story of how and why he killed his wife. And that's, so the main character, I suppose, is Posnyshev, the man who killed his wife, but the structure is a little bit complicated. Wait, I wanted to go back slightly, though, to your contention that everybody thinks of Tolstoy as crazy, and I wanted to read the beginning of the A.N. Wilson chapter on the Kreutzer Sonata in his biography of Tolstoy, which sort of gives us a setup for... A.N. Wilson was very instrumental, I think, in establishing the current modern reading of Tolstoy in terms of his sort of character and biography, and I don't agree with A.N. Wilson about very much about it, but he does sort of summarize the conventional wisdom pretty well here. Among all his other creative qualities, Tolstoy has an abiding capacity to irritate his reader. Doubtless it is a capacity which produced in him its own curious satisfaction. But much more than his capacity to irritate, he has a power to disturb, to unsettle, to upset. Although his targets were his own contemporaries, the government, the church, the westernizing liberals, and the literary establishment of the day, together with experts and intellectuals of all kinds, medics, scientists, and theologians. I love this. These are all my enemies too. He also possessed a prophetic knack. He expressed opinions about the human condition which to this day are capable of getting under people's skin and making them angry. In no area of his thought is this more apparent than in his analysis, from the late 1880s onward, of the sexual question. Any modern reader of this phase and group of his writings can expect to be ruffled. While there are probably more people in the world today than ever before who sympathize, in broad outline, with Tolstoy's ardent pacifism, with his suspicion of alcohol and tobacco, even with his vegetarianism, there are also probably fewer than ever before who are able to stomach his views about sex. It is this non-literary fact which probably explains why almost everyone misunderstands the masterpiece of his penultimate period, the Kreutzer Sonata. Ta-da!
So that's interesting, that quote from Wilson. I mean, he does kind of get to the nub of what is nettlesome about Tolstoy, is, well, that he makes this argument, and not only does he make it, but he makes it, brilliantly. And part of the brilliance is the setup, the construction of the novella. But you wanted to also talk about the themes and...
Well, I wanted to say, first of all, that you've used two words that I find distressing, nub and nettle, in the same sentence just there.
Really? Well, I have...
It's just awful. Nub and nettle.
Nettlesome is a great word. You don't like that.
The nettle... I don't know why.
It's from grasp the nettle.
Yes, exactly.
That's from Shakespeare.
Yes, and I've been fighting this for years with you. Your tendency to grasp the nettle repulses me, and I can't help it. It's
oh my gosh.
I don't know. It's just sometimes there are certain words that are wrong or sound wrong or give you sort of the ick. And
I mean,
both nub and nettle are such words for me.
Well, I never grasp the nettle when there's anyone else around. So, I mean, Okay, so.
Suffering, deep suffering. So, this is great because the theme...
Deep suffering is great. See, that's Russian literature in one, in like 5 words.
Right. The theme of this story is the relations between men and women. And
yes.
How we lead each other to great suffering. So I guess one of the reasons that I've sort of enthralled and blown away by this story is because really its topic is marriage and what goes wrong in a marriage. This man, Posnyshev, kills his wife, and Tolstoy has a whole theory on what goes wrong between men and women. And for me, this is a enthralling and important piece because I'm divorced. I had children in Brooklyn while everybody was suddenly realizing that their marriage was terrible all around me. I think that modern people do have a lot of difficulty being married and staying married, and our modern expectations are very badly set up to succeed in marriage. And you go from the sort of great phase of falling in love and brunching to suddenly you have small children and you're at each other's throats. And why this happens this way, why it's, we have the whole, non-monogamy trends, all of these ways that people are trying to make marriage work better for them, and why marriage isn't working to the extent that it is not working in our society is, I think, a fascinating question, and Tolstoy has an answer for that.
Yes, indeed. And this great visionary, and he is a visionary, there's no question about that. And in fact, I reread rather carefully the epilogue to the main piece, where he talks about Christianity as being higher than any of the other religions, but he is at pains to point out, and I think this is very interesting, that Christianity is not a precept, but rather it's an ideal. And he uses the metaphor, and this is fantastic, that a precept, a man who is following precepts, is like somebody who is standing in a stationary cone of light, right? And he can see only within that cone of light, and everything within the cone is very clear, but he can't go anywhere. Whereas to have an ideal, which is what Christianity is to have a lantern at the end of a pole, and you will never get closer to it, but it will always guide you no matter where you're going. So that's
gorgeous.
It's,
beautiful.
I mean, look,
Yeah.
He's a fantastic writer, and to take a novella of suspense.
He was corrected as a novella.
Thank you.
I was hoping this would not come back up, but
Yes.
here it has.
Well,
Yes,
we have to refer
novella
to it somehow. We need a handle.
as a novella.
Yes.
There we go.
Yes. It's a novella of suspense, because you're listening to, what's his name?
Posnyshev.
Posnyshev.
I mean, we're going to do our best here. I'm going to pronounce things in the sort of Russian-ish way when I can.
And I will
It won't be perfect.
I will pronounce English in the English-ish way, which is how I speak it. So anyway.
But you speak so many languages. One thing that we don't know about Jeffrey, the listeners may not know, is how many languages he speaks.
Oh, please go away with this nonsense. Anyway, so it's a tale of suspense. That's the skill of Tolstoy, that he conceals the fact that it's a theological tract behind that tale of suspense. That takes considerable sleight of hand.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we're back to the Christianity, which is
the master. You can't beat the master here. I mean,
here we go.
It's Tolstoy.
Tolstoyolatry is what we're experiencing here. So Christianity is his template for everything, but particularly marriage, because marriage is where sexual love comes into play, and sexual love is bad from his point of view, right?
Right. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there in that statement, because while I adore Tolstoy, I do not think that his take on Christian marriage is necessarily, not to confuse the streams here, orthodox. I don't think that he has really grasped what Christian marriage is supposed to be, but the thing that is very challenging about this story, and is the reason that, I mean, there are two reasons why this story could basically not be taught and not be studied in our world right now. And one is because it promotes or endorses chastity, and by chastity in this sense I mean sexual abstinence. At least in a Catholic concept, chastity can mean sexuality in its proper place, but that is not really what Tolstoy is endorsing here. What he's endorsing is total abstinence.
Wait a minute.
And it's also very misogynist. So two reasons why the story is just a no-fly zone in contemporary culture: anti-sex and misogyny. You were protesting. Please do.
I'm puzzled. I thought chastity had only one meaning, namely abstinence. Is that not so?
That is not so. In a Catholic sense, chastity means behaving properly in the scenario. So you can be chaste within marriage if you are having only the kind of sex that the church allows, and no funny business, which...
No funny business. NFB.
It's called unitive and generative sexuality, and it is all sexual encounters have to be potentially creating of life.
Procreative.
So no blowjobs, basically. And we could go on from there, but
well,
there's one place for the proper.
I thought that was pretty expressive right there. I think that sort of encapsulates a whole gestalt. But I mean, usually A leads to B, leads to C, leads to like having kids. But okay, I guess in Catholicism you cut to the chase, right? Is that the idea?
Catholicism has very developed ideas about what creates a good human society and how we should be following natural law and being close to Christ, and a pillar of it is sexual chastity,
right.
Which does not mean abstinence. But Tolstoy, you want to protest?
No. There's so many opportunities.
Jeffrey wants to speak up for blowjobs here.
No, well, yeah, pretty much. I mean, I'm speaking impersonally, of course, and in a general philosophical way, but no, it's okay. It's just your sort of exposition of the church's advanced views on these matters gives me so many opportunities to needle you that I almost don't know where to begin. So let's just take it as written, and let's just segue on to the next enlightened matter that you're going to reveal for us.
It's true. It's for the best, really, because once we really start getting into why these rules of the church make sense, things get too controversial.
They don't make sense. Yes, you see, once we get into how they make sense in heavy quotation marks.
Oh no, they make sense.
Oh, I see. Okay. Okay, well.
But again, like this starts getting, we don't want to go here because
that's my secular Judaism squelched right there.
Drawing a bright line on potentially generative sexuality is kind of the only way to make sense of a case for sexual morality in general. Like, if one act is allowed, then why not another one? Then why not another one? And
that's what I say.
And how do you like New York City in 2025?
Well, okay, all right. Very good. That was an extremely, rigorous little leap of logic there. No, nothing extravagant going on here. No.
We are Tolstoyans.
No questions being begged.
We are extravagant.
Yeah. But let's talk now about how this shows up in Tolstoy. His particular conception, pun intended, of the role, the only legitimate role, the very, very circumscribed role of sex. And moreover, and this is the bulk of the novel, I think, what happens to human beings if they stray from the true path and just have sex because they like it and they want it.
Right. I mean, right. So to sort of, to not discuss things I agree with or don't agree with here, just to kind of lay out his case, he does a brilliant job, first of all, of sort of diagnosing society, and his society was very similar to ours. I'll read Ann Wilson again here. He says, "If the story has a moral or a point, it is surely to demonstrate that sexual passion and marriage reduce people to these conditions of hatred. And it is the truth of this, rather than its alleged ungallantry, which all readers find uncomfortable. Tolstoy does not say in this story that it is a universal truth, but there is enough evidence around us to know that it is true." So basically what Tolstoy is saying is that people marry for sort of reasons of shallow pleasure and egotism, which is for him basically what sex is, a dirty and shameful thing, but pleasurable. So people marry basically for pleasure, and people are looking at each other basically as tools for the experience of pleasure. And that once you have sort of gone through the fun romance period where everybody's sort of ego fantasies are being satisfied and the pleasure is anticipated, and then you are actually just married, the truth becomes clear. And hold on for a second, I'm going to read the passage from the Kreutzer Sonata. But the truth becomes clear, which is that we are sort of two shallow egotists locked together in sort of mutual resentment. And I mean, I think the point of the A.N. Wilson quote, which may not have been totally clear, is that it's kind of self-evident. Like, a lot of times this is what you see in a marriage.
As Saul Bellow put it, two psychopaths under a quilt.
Perfect, exactly. So let's look for the passage. So the contention is that sex and sexuality is the sort of what we really want from each other, and that this is really the wrong way to treat another person, which I personally think is only true, and that this is a brilliant insight, and that the sort of modern jump into bed together and start having sex first before you even decide if you like each other, like that's the sort of hello in this day and age. And I think it is truly and surprisingly resonant as a metaphor for how you'll treat each other as time goes on, which is usually badly. But here's Tolstoy's explanation of it. This is from the Kreutzer Sonata. This is Pozneshev talking about his wife, and after they've gotten married and they've had their first fight. He says, "The impression of that first quarrel was dreadful. I call it a quarrel, but it was not a quarrel, but only the disclosure of the abyss that really existed between us. Amorousness was exhausted by the satisfaction of sensuality, and we were left confronting one another in our true relation, that is, as two egotists quite alien to each other, who wished to get as much pleasure as possible from the other. I call what took place between us a quarrel, but it was not a quarrel, only the consequence of the cessation of sensuality, revealing our real relations to each other. I did not understand that this cold and hostile relation was our normal state. I did not understand it because, at first, this hostile attitude was very soon concealed from us by a renewal of redistilled sensuality, that is, by lovemaking."
Yeah, I mean, of course, these themes have been explored widely and longly, so to speak.
I don't think so.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think the idea that sensuality, Shakespeare, right? The expense of spirit in a waste of lust. That's from one of the sonnets. And then there's the old Latin tag, post coitum omne anima triste sive mulier atque gallus, which is, after coitus, every animal is sad except for the rooster and the human female.
That's funny. I was about to say, I don't think that's true.
Well, you're not a rooster, ergo.
Ergo,
Yes.
I'm a human female. I was like, that's totally not true. I've always thought that. I mean, you hear that. I don't think I've heard it with, besides for women, it's like everyone is sad after sex or
I
after
bet you
orgasm.
haven't heard it in Latin before, though. Huh?
No. See, as I was praising you earlier, you are a man of many tongues.
Please just continue, if you would.
I distracted me now. I don't remember what I was saying.
So we're talking about this view of marriage and using people as a means rather than an end.
Oh, and we were talking about sex as being sort of
Using people as instrumentalities for one's own pleasure, right? That's
right.
Tolstoy's, that's the gravamen.
Right.
I don't think I've ever had an opportunity to say gravamen before. I mean,
I don't even know what gravamen means.
I think it means like that's the focal point, the crux of his argument. I may be using it wrong, but I enjoyed saying it. Anyway, so like in Kant, right? He talks of Kantian ethics based on the idea that we should regard people never only as a means, but always also as ends in themselves, which is very interesting because it doesn't say that we should not use people as means, because you're always going to, like if you say to somebody, hey, how do I get to Maple Street? You're using them as a means, but never only as a means. Right. So anyway, yeah. So sex is bad, right?
Well, yeah, I was distracted by a potential comment that I guess I'm not going to make.
Wait for the unexpurgated version, folks. Not sold in stores.
I mean, for me, there are a couple of layers to this story, and one is that he considers sex to actually just be bad, which is something that I don't agree with him about, and I don't think that he's, quite fully seeing the possibilities. And, it's also interesting because he was one of the many reasons that modern people sort of dismiss Tolstoy or later Tolstoy. It's sort of like my memory of sort of what was wrong with Tolstoy. At some point in my teens or 20s, I thought, oh, Tolstoy is not an interesting person to research more about his biography, and he's not an interesting writer to read outside of the two great novels because he became a religious whack job and he was a super misogynist and everybody knows to hate him because he made his wife have 13 children and sort of was living this pronatalist commune kind of experiment out on his estate of Yasnaya Polyana, and people would just sort of roll their eyes and say how horrible and forget him, don't take any of these ideas seriously. I think that this impression of Tolstoy being abusive to his wife has come from A.N. Wilson and is not totally true. I think when you look at the Tolstoy's relationship in more detail through their diaries, you have to sort of have both impressions at the same time. Obviously, they fought a lot, and Sonia, his wife, would write about what a miserable bastard he was and how much she hated him and how all feeling for him was gone and how he treated her so terribly. And then a few pages later, she would be writing about his brilliance and how charming he was and how they were closer than ever. So, like the diaries, because they were both prolific diarists, the diaries are sort of interpretable however you want them to be.
Right,
and,
right.
Really, if any of us was keeping a diary of our marriage, it would sound like both people were absolute monsters.
Half the time.
Yeah.
And then there's the other half the time. So it's like, what half do you want to... Well, that's, of course, the problem of, interpreting texts is to what extent can you put aside your biases and all of that.
Right. Oh, but my point about that was that despite that I don't think that he was abusive to his wife, I do think that he somehow managed to have very little joy from his large family. And, I think that one of the reasons that he doesn't appreciate sex is because he didn't really throw himself into the role of being a father. He was always the genius, like sitting out writing his novels, and he was not really all in the way he should have been to family life. Thus, he sees only the bad parts of sex and not the good parts, in my opinion. But for the purposes of the story, he thinks that sex is bad and evil and disgusting and that it leads people astray in these terrible ways, and that, in fact, he does sort of endorse in the story that we should all just stop having sex and let revelation come and the human race could be extincted, like we're done with it, which is a pretty extreme viewpoint, but that is the viewpoint expressed in the story. I also don't endorse that.
Yeah, it's very, very strange. Because he takes this ideal of Christianity, and he is at pains to say it's an ideal, and he pushes it as far as it can be pushed, and he's also very clear that you can never really get there. It's
right.
Like that lantern at the end of the pole is always going to be ahead of you, which is sort of Kierkegaardian, that no one is a true Christian, really.
But then he just kind of goes out and gets there because he does try to make the utopian conclusions, but you feel like he's just sort of spinning out in a demented sort of virtuosic way.
It has that quality, and that is Poznishev. His soliloquy is kind of the literary embodiment of that the guy's views are so extreme, but at the same time, you almost can't argue against him because he set himself up as a moral absolute. He's saying, I, Poznishev, am the most evil human being possible because I murdered my wife. Therefore, who better to expound on what constitutes genuine goodness?
Mm-hmm.
It's a real...
It's brilliant.
It is brilliant. It's a trap, really. It's an elaborate sort of trap for the reader because he's sort of impaled you on the horns of that dilemma. Mm-hmm. And it's brilliantly done. And even I have to point out that just the sheer literary craft of the thing, like the coming and going, this all takes place in a train, right?
Right.
This guy is unburdening himself to a stranger, to a nameless stranger, as you point out. And there are all these other little details, like people get on, the train will stop in a station, other passengers go in and out, and somehow that all adds to the realism, and they're all foils for the guy.
Right. And it's just wonderfully readable. It's like pick it up, and once you've read 10 sentences, you can't stop. So I want us to pivot a little bit to the music in the book, just because we could talk about the book for hours. However, I want to make one last observation, which is that Tolstoy, this story was written about by another one of my favorite thinkers, also a person I disagree with in some respects, but whose sort of virtuosic ranting I love, and that's Andrea Dworkin. So in the book Intercourse...
Should I leave the room?
We shall not make certain jokes at this moment.
Yes.
Andrea Dworkin wrote in the book Intercourse, the first chapter, Intercourse is an analysis of a bunch of literary works, and the first chapter is on the Kreutzer Sonata, the Tolstoy story, and she calls the Kreutzer Sonata dense, passionate, artful, crazed with misogyny and insight.
Yeah.
Yeah, when Dworkin's on, she's on.
Well, look, she was extremely intelligent. There's no question about that. Well, okay. Yeah, insight. And yet, here's an interesting thing. It sounds like we're pivoting to talk about the music.
We're pivoting to talk about the music. Should we need to give just a little introduction about how the music even appears in this story.
Well, that's good that you said it, because I was about to point out there are sort of two kind of interesting ways in which the novella and the music interact. One is that there's actually very little mention of the piece itself and why it's even called the Kreutzer Sonata. Well, I guess because the Kreutzer Sonata, the piece, is so tempestuous and so passionate that it makes a great sort of punching bag for Tolstoy's views about sensual pleasure. I mean, he could have used any piece of music, really. I mean, the adulterous guy who comes along, and we don't even really know if they actually had sex, right? Do we know for a fact?
Tukashevsky or another...
Tukashevsky.
No, we don't know if they ever had sex or not. We know that they performed the Kreutzer Sonata together, and...
Well, that's almost as good, right? So there you go. But that's the point, is actually that music and sex are analogous in Tolstoy's world, and let me get to that. So the point is that, first of all, it actually plays both a key sort of inciting role in the story, and yet is mentioned very little. But when it is mentioned, let me read the following. Okay, so this is from the novella, from the Tolstoy. They played Beethoven's Kreutzer Sonata. He finally went on to say, this is Poznishev speaking. Do you know the first presto? Do you know it? He cried. Ugh, that sonata is a terrible thing, and especially that movement. And it's true that this is not Tolstoy. It's true that movement is the most passionate and weighty of the three. So Tolstoy says, music in general is a terrible thing. I cannot comprehend it. So here's a guy who is, in effect, admits that he doesn't understand music and yet is presuming to lecture us about the proper role, or more accurately, probably non-role, of music in society. So he goes on. What is music? What does it do? And why does it have the effect it has? So he's admitting that it does have this extremely powerful effect. They say music has the effect of elevating the soul. Rubbish! Nonsense. It has its effect. It has a terrible effect. I am speaking about its effect on me. But not at all of elevating the soul. Its effect is neither to elevate nor to degrade, but to excite. How can I explain it to you? Music makes me forget myself, my real situation. It transports me into a state that is not my natural one. Under the influence of music, it seems to me that I feel what I do not really feel, that I understand what I do not really understand, and that I can do what I can't do. Now, most people would say, yes, that's why we listen to it, because it takes us out of ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I don't see why, and Tolstoy's not the, I mean, you can go back, in fact, to Plato, who thought that poets should be regulated. But why would this not be a gateway to the divine? I don't know. It's just some sort of bizarre, and yet didn't Tolstoy have music played by his serfs to get up?
That was his grandfather.
Oh.
Well, I mean, it's very interesting that as far as I understood it, I feel like he thought that music excited the passions too much and led you like off to have sex that you shouldn't be having. And that was a biographical fact, was that he listened to the Kreutzer Sonata one night in St. Petersburg and then went and had sex with his wife, and that was the genesis of his 13th child. He was actually driven to do something that he was trying not to do, I suppose. He was trying to pursue abstinence, and then the Kreutzer Sonata just overwhelmed him. But that's a slightly different point than this kind of philosophical point that he makes about what music does that you just read. I mean, I think the fear of sex and the fear of music are tied up together.
Yeah, right? But it's cloaked in a sort of strange, like, pragmatism. He's complaining about music, and he says, and that is why music excites and does not bring to any conclusion. When they play a military march, the soldiers move forward under its strains, and the music accomplishes something. They play dance music, and I dance, and the music accomplishes something. They perform a mass, I take the sacrament. Again, the music accomplishes its purpose. But in other cases, like pure instrumental music, right, like the Kreutzer Sonata, but in other cases there is only excitement, and it is impossible to tell what to do in this state of mind.
That might be true.
That just seems like such a strange, and for a brilliant, real genius like Tolstoy, such an odd kind of misunderstanding. It's sort of like saying, well, music doesn't make me more effective at work.
Well, but I mean, now we're talking about different people's lifestyle choices, like some people who are a part of this podcast, like listening to music for sort of the sheer pleasure of it. He didn't approve of that. And our sort of idle and dissipated modern reality, where we're all focused on our immediate sort of pleasure gratification, really isn't good for people.
Yeah, okay, well, that's where I disagree, because the whole thrust of the book that I'm writing about classical music is that the pleasure that you get from classical music is related to the meaningfulness of the experience of listening. That those two, in fact, are inseparable. And you know who agrees with me? Nietzsche. Because Nietzsche was also a composer.
I mean, I don't know who like. Let's do a listener poll, like Tolstoy or Nietzsche, like.
Very obviously Nietzsche, I think, because Nietzsche's core idea was power, but power really is in Nietzsche. He was obsessed with health, which is interesting because his own health was not very good. But he talks all the time, Nietzsche does, about unhealthiness. And his writing style, of course, is very histrionic. And he'll say, fresh air, we need fresh air, because these ideas, whatever he's destroying at the time, are old and they smell of illness and weakness. But that's a secularist ideal, of course.
Right. Yeah.
And
so the secularists are
wrong?
Down with sort of excited passions leading nowhere except more sensual pleasure, and the Christians are not.
It's our contemplation of our greatness as a species.
I mean, I was about to make that point too, is I think that what is it doing in terms of listening to classical music today? What it's doing is it's teaching you about our sort of greatness and possibility as a species, exactly, and knowing the history of the art of your kind is a valuable thing in itself. But when I think about the role of music in sort of pop culture, or even the role of music as it's been in my life, like I do think that somewhere in the story he says, and we all know that all affairs are started by music. And you're like, yeah, that's kind of true. Like, one of the first things you start doing when this is the mixtape. Like, it starts in high school with the mixtape. Like, music is a means of courtship. And music also is a means of yearning and wanting other people, like all of this romantic music. You're driving around in your car listening to like the XX and thinking about cheating on your husband. Like, that's how it works.
Well, yes, that is how it works. And music and dance, which are intimately related, even non-dance music, because obviously rhythm is literally the pulse of music. And I think, was it George Bernard Shaw who referred to dancing as the vertical expression of the horizontal intent?
Right, right. None of it is crazy. So just for one tiny orientating note for our readers, our listeners, what happens in the story is that Posnyshev marries this woman. They end up being unhappy. He has a lot of explanation for why that is. And eventually she starts taking contraception, which he was very against, and becomes more interested in herself and her looks. And she's, of course, still a very young woman. And she starts flirting with a scummy local musician named Trukashevsky, something like that. And they play the Kreutzer Sonata together, and then Posnyshev becomes so consumed by jealousy and the belief that they're having an affair, whether they did or didn't, that he kills her. So that's the story arc. I mean, I think obviously he chose the Kreutzer Sonata because of this impassioned situation. Oh, and also another brief note is that he heard this piece of music in St. Petersburg with Ilya Repin and a famous actor, and they all three of them agreed to make a work inspired by it. And
is that true?
It is true. But Tolstoy was the only one who actually did it. So Repin did not paint the painting, and the actor did not stage it somehow, but Tolstoy did do it.
Wrote this great, fantastic, and really infuriating short story. But infuriating in like sort of a good way. Like it's fascinating.
I don't think it's infuriating. I think it's totally true. If married people were trying to not have sex with each other, they would have a lot more sex. It's brilliant.
Wait a minute, say that again?
If married people were trying to abstain, they'd have a lot more sex. Like,
right.
One of the problems with marriage is that you're supposed to be like horny for each other every second of the day. Like, that's how the sort of courtship thing goes. And then you get married and you're like, well, I'm kind of bored tonight. I'd rather watch TV. But we should be having sex. Like, the pressure to be having sex and to be wanting sex is culturally very extreme because everybody has this sort of self-vision of being all sexed up. And then they get into a marriage and they're like, well, we're not succeeding at that, and the desire diminishes. Whereas if they were trying, if they weren't using contraception and they were trying to not have sex, they'd still want each other.
This reminds me of
poor Jeffrey.
Of course, this reminds me of a Saturday Night Live skit because, of course, Tolstoy and Saturday Night Live really are sort of intellectually intertwined. I've never been able to refine this thing, but there's some character and he's like a tantra coach, and like so he's presenting like he's going to give a workshop or something. And his workshop is perpetual orgasm. You can have like orgasm all the time. So his facial expressions, I'm not going to get too graphic here, but he looks like he's a guy who's like having a perpetual orgasm. And at one point, he thinks the mic is not live. And he says something like, "Please help me."
Exactly. Very good. Oh, there's some line in here, I'll try to remember it, where it reminds me of some part of that Chris Rock skit that we like.
Oh, yeah.
So we got to get to that too. But please give the people some information on why this is the most tempestuous and romantic piece of music of all time. And then let's listen to it and talk about it. And we can also break down Tolstoy's sort of criticisms of it because he likes the first movement and says the other three are bad.
Oh, well, that's very interesting. The other two. Yeah, it's interesting what he says there. Before we leave this, though, I have to just also point out that one of your writing topics, D.H. Lawrence, also said something to the effect of people read my novels and they think that I'm in favor of perpetual sex. And he said perpetual sex is actually a very bad idea.
Right.
So
yeah, and that's
that's
now we have the sort of erectile dysfunction crisis and the internet dating where nobody can even be bothered to get back to each other. I mean, when I was married and I saw my friends internet dating, and I would say like, "Oh, you talked to him? Did you meet him yet? What's going on?" And everybody would kind of be like, no. And you're like, what's wrong with you? Like, how you have the opportunity to go meet other people and maybe sleep with them. That sounds incredible. And once you start doing it, you realize totally not incredible, and everybody is sort of instantly alienated by this endless sexual choice parade.
Well, that's a problem of the network topology, which is that inventing a world, namely the internet, where we have infinite nodes on the network, and we're one of those nodes, was always just a bad fucking idea. For a guy who was in software development for a long time, we're not going to go down this road, but the fundamental paradigm doesn't work. And of course, people say, well, but, and as you know, one of my closest friends, Joel, right, met his wife and they have twins, they have a wonderful marriage, blah, blah, blah. That's a little bit like saying that if you just randomly shoot people, you will at some point shoot somebody who was going to go off and murder somebody. So therefore, you should just shoot people randomly. No, the argument doesn't work.
I don't think I understand, but...
Well, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Anyway.
So let's do the music.
So we're going to transition now towards talking about the music itself, the Beethoven Kreutzer Sonata, which is an extraordinarily wonderful piece. And I say that as somebody who has great admiration for Beethoven, but not great love. Tolstoy, as I said before, doesn't really talk about the music that much. And what he says, I think, is wrong. So I'm going to read to you what Tolstoy says.
He's reading off of his phone.
Now. Any port in the storm, Okay, so Poznishev is talking. They're still in the train. And he's talking about this concert where they played the Kreutzer Sonata, which presumably inflamed his wife and therefore leading to the whole...
Inflamed him, not the wife.
Okay. But anyway, so he says, after the Allegro, which is the first movement, which we'll hear, they played the beautiful but rather trite and unoriginal Andante with its uninspired variations and the weak finale.
Haha.
Now, I just want to say that is a load of bullshit. That is just completely wrong. The finale is not weaker than the first movement, but it is more lightweight. And it is deliberately more lightweight because in music in classical music anyway, you have what they call das finale problema, right? The problem of the finale, which is the problem of how do you end a work. And one time-honored way to do it is with something that's lighter and therefore is kind of kind to the human attention span. So that's what Beethoven does here and in many other places, and lots of composers have adopted that approach. So
you end the work only in the way that is inclined to lead to children.
Well, yes, that's right.
There's only one way to end the work, my friend.
Get the audience's juices flowing. Yes, indeed. I suppose you could argue that. And then the variation movement, I think, is also wonderful and lyrical and great. But what's interesting is that this view of the Kreutzer Sonata seems to have taken hold. And I'm going to read to you now from a book.
Has taken hold? You think that Tolstoy has influenced Charles Rosen?
Well, it's hard to see how. Because, okay, so you've sort of...
sorry.
No, that's all right.
We can go back, delete, and carry on.
No, we're carrying on. So I'm going to read from a book called The Classical Style, which is sort of a magisterial book about the first Vienna school, the great composers of that period, Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. Okay, bang, three.
And this is a physical book. We do not have it on our phone. We
Correct.
are holding the tome in hand.
Not only are we holding the tome in hand, but I have had this tome for so long that the sticker price that I see right on the cover now is $3.95. Okay.
Brutal. All right.
All right. So anyway, but this is a book that's Charles Rosen, right? Pianist, scholar, composer, probably was a great music scholar. He died about 10, 12 years ago. And he was one of those guys that sort of irritates everybody because he could sort of do everything. And he was a brilliant scholar of music, but he wrote this as a general interest book for people like us. And he also wrote for the New York Review of Books. So let me see if I can find the passage where he talks about the Kreutzer Sonata. So he says, in 1803, the Kreutzer Sonata has a first movement unequaled in formal clarity, grandeur, and dramatic force by anything that Beethoven had yet written. And that's saying something.
Big claim, right?
That's a big claim, yeah. Then he goes on, the beautiful slow movement, however, a set of variations, belongs to a totally different style, elegant, brilliant, ornamental, and a little precious. The style of, and then he names some other piece. And then he says, The finale, a light and brilliant tarantella, which is a musical form I'll explain in a sec. The finale, a light and brilliant tarantella, was written for another sonata altogether. Now, the conclusion. Rosen then says, Beethoven never again presented such a hybrid as one work. So what he's saying is that it's kind of a dog's breakfast and it doesn't really hang together. And the two things on which he rests his argument are the second movement, of course, and the third movement. Now, the second movement is, yes, it's sort of rococo after the storm and stress of the first movement. And my feeling is that the first movement kind of brings down a sort of tragic hammer. There are literally hammer blows in the music. I mean, I say literally, it's obviously not a hammer, but, piano chords that are like hammer blows. And this is very typically Beethovenian, okay? That's a hard act to follow. What do you do after that? And it seems to me that you do something that's completely different and that then sort of reins the listener in and says, but on the other hand, there is also this, which is delicate and frilly and light, but at the same time kind of radiant, and there is depth, but it doesn't hit you over the head with the depth, okay? So I feel that the second movement flows fantastically from the first movement. Mm-hmm. Then, okay, the third movement, it's lighter. It was written for another sonata. That's true. Beethoven originally intended it for the finale of a different piece. And my question is, so what? Who cares? Now, I don't know how Rosen arrived at these conclusions. He must have known that Tolstoy was an extremely...
Well, but the question is not who cares. I mean, of course, it doesn't matter if it's actually the perfect thing to be the finale, but if it feels like three separate things that don't go together, that's an artistic failure.
Yeah, of course. And, that's why I'm saying that Rosen is kind of... He's sort of saying it is a great masterpiece, yet it's also a hybrid. He uses the word hybrid.
Which is a criticism. It's a veiled criticism.
Yes, it's a veiled criticism. That's right. And I think he's wrong.
So basically we have Tolstoy and Charles Rosen think that the piece is not all that except for the first movement, and you believe that the three movements all go together. I mean, what's your case for the third movement?
Well, my case for the third movement is sort of like if I buy a suit from a tailor. And I say, well, this cloth, I'm not sure, you were going to originally use this for a different suit. And the tailor says to me, well, who cares?
But that's not the problem with the argument. I mean, it's not because it's
I know,
for a
but
different sonata.
I like the analogy. Because the tailor then says, look, do you like the suit or do you not like the suit? It doesn't matter that I used other cloth from this same bolt to make something completely different.
And nobody's contesting that. What we're contesting is that there is a third movement that I forget the characterization. What's it like?
Well,
you said one was rococo, and then the third movement is...
The third movement is a tarantella, which means that it's kind of light and it's a dance. Tarantella is a form that was around in the 19th century, and it comes from a piece of Italian sort of folklore, which is that you're bitten by a tarantula, and so you dance very fast in this sort of 6/8 meter. Mm-hmm. Da-dum, 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 dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee, and you'll hear it in a sec, So
is there in your mind a sort of conception? I mean, because I thought it was interesting what you said before about the first piece being so overwhelming that then there's sort of nothing more to say in that register, and you're trying to offer another equally sort of wonderful human state, or wonderful, maybe it's not right, but like you're trying to offer...
No, it is wonderful.
Okay, so you're trying to offer another wonderful human state that's different, and then is this third piece offering yet a third valuable and interesting kind of difference? Like, you see the piece as a whole that's doing something, or as a confusing mishmash?
Well, I see it as a whole that's doing something.
And
I mean, that's why I vehemently disagree.
That's what I'm trying to find out,
yes.
Is what is the third part doing?
What the third part is doing is that it is a dynamic energy, which is in fact so dynamic that it almost sort of drives out any sentimentality. Okay, it is so dynamic that there is no room for pathos or sentimentality. Almost. There's one passage that comes about that is in fact somewhat sentimental and kind of gauzy and rather lovely. But basically, I've asked myself, am I just biased in favor of what is? I forget what that's called. It's not recency bias. I want to believe in the piece, but at the same time, I do believe in the piece. So I think I'm right. I think these other guys are wrong. I think it hangs together. But it is true that the three movements are very disparate.
I mean, I would usually tease you. However, I do
No.
feel like
Has that ever happened?
I shall go on. I feel like Tolstoy is certainly someone who's capable of missing things, so it's not surprising that he liked only the first sort of insane, tempestuous, maximum intensity thing and then gave up on understanding the other notes.
Yeah, I mean,
That's not surprising.
I agree with you on that. The Rosen conclusion I find more surprising, and I take what he has to say
More seriously than Tolstoy on classical music.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
I like that we said of course at the same time.
of course you do. Maybe he's right. Maybe he's right. I mean, I've listened to this piece a lot. I'm going to keep listening to it a lot. But why is it so important? And what should we hear when we listen, particularly to the first movement? We should hear that excitement-producing energy that Tolstoy talked about and found so suspicious and dangerous. So let's do that.
Once again, we are asking, is this piece of music making us horny?
In a manner of speaking, we are asking that.
Not to lower the tone of the classical music podcast.
No, but there shouldn't be a thing of like, oh, classical music is beyond and stuff like that. I mean, there are certain composers where the music, I think, is just so sort of ravishingly sensual that, well, it's ravishingly sensual. Like Monteverdi, for example. Monteverdi's music, especially for the female voice, I think is just like sort of pure sex, basically.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, yes. Let's boogie down with Beethoven. Yeah, so this is a sonata for violin and piano, but I believe the dedication, it says piano and violin. And that's important because what that means is that the piano is not merely an accompaniment, okay? It's an equal partnership between the violin and the piano. And the opening presto or allegro or whatever it is, anyway, it's very fast and very energetic. However, it starts with a slow introduction, which is quite lyrical and which is a sort of musical bait and switch and very, obviously incredibly skillful on Beethoven's part. So we'll begin with the first movement. Just completely sunny and liquid. But the piano now answers in a different vein. So we've already taken a turn towards a darker tonality. And you hear this alternation of lighter and darker shades throughout this introduction, and that really becomes sort of a leitmotif of the fast part, the main portion of the movement. Now for the allegro, the main part of the first movement, which Tolstoy was so worked up about. one thing you'll hear in this next section is a sort of almost hypnotic sense of repetition. And repetition in Beethoven is not a sign that he couldn't think of what to do next, but on the other hand, it's a source of sort of primal power, which is the power of sound itself. And that's why Beethoven has the place that he has in music history, and also why Tolstoy got so pissed off about him.
Wow. Great so far.
So those thudding, repetitive chords. Beethoven really sort of unleashed the power of music in a way that the two other predecessors, as great as they were, Haydn and Mozart, didn't arrive at. And so anyway, that was all very tempestuous, and that's your sort of opening theme. Now we come to the contrasting second theme, and contrast leads to tension, tension leads to drama, and that pisses Tolstoy off. So we're back where we were. And so now back to the tempestuous stuff. And then we'll have finally a concluding theme, and this is what's known as the exposition. We expose or present the main musical material, and after this comes a development section, which I will also signal.
So this has all been sort of just the preface, what we've been listening to?
Well, not the preface. It's sort of the main initial thrust of the argument, the exposition.
I thought you said we were about to get to the exposition.
No, this is all exposition.
This is all exposition.
Yeah, first theme, and now second theme, and then there'll be a concluding theme.
Wait, and then after the concluding theme, is that the end of the first part?
Yes, that's the end of the exposition.
Okay. As a person who's not super versed in classical music, it's always amazing to me how weird it is.
Yeah.
It's like, it feels, you don't think of how experimental and strange Beethoven is, a thing from the past that's part of history. But, I mean, just even putting these pieces together is strange.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I like that because strange is good, because strange is vivid and relevant to the human psyche, as opposed to looking at classical music as like a museum piece, which is bad.
Right, yeah. I mean, when you're actually just listening to it without your preconceptions, wow.
It's crazy stuff.
It's crazy stuff, yeah.
Yeah. Just that sort of thudding repetition again and again. It's really like when I say hammer blows, that's kind of what I mean in all but the most literal sense, because sound is power. Sound is energy. I'm not a physicist, but that's true. We feel that. Like when they talk about, you go to a rock concert, you feel the bass in your chest, that kind of thing. So anyway, here's the concluding theme. And now we have these like sort of hammer blow chords. And now we begin abrupt key change. We begin the development section. I'm not going to say very much during the development section because it's all sort of Beethoven taking the musical materials that we just heard in the exposition, that were exposed in the exposition, and sort of putting them through a kind of musical Cuisinart, so to speak, and chopping them up and seeing how they fit together, etc., etc. But you'll recognize all these previous themes, and particularly that concluding theme that we just heard. Okay, so I just want to interrupt the development to talk a little bit about what's actually going on here. And I like to use the analogy of a blender, that Beethoven is taking his musical materials and putting them in a blender and seeing and hearing them in all sorts of different ways. But what's the point of this? Why are we doing this?
Right. Why are we blending it? I mean, it's amazing and fantastic. And I feel like your blender analogy is really good. When you put it that way, I can see what's going on in the music. But yeah, why do that to a piece of music?
Why are we doing this? The reason that we're doing this is because in the development section, we have moved away from the main key. And so we are existentially psychologically sort of in a condition of lostness, okay, of being lost. And then it becomes all the more powerful when we return, sort of come home. There's sort of a mythological structure to this kind of form, which is called sonata form, where we have an exposition, then there's development, then there's recapitulation. That's very dry terminology, but psychologically, what's going on is you have a sense of being somewhere in the home key, and it's actually called the home key because you're at home, right? There's a sense of settledness, and then there's a sense of unease and wandering, and then there's a sense of returning home. That's the recapitulation. That's the psychological substructure of sonata form, and it's an extraordinary thing. So basically, it's kind of like, it's like there's an old Zen saying, it's something like, in the beginning, mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers. Then, mountains are not mountains and rivers are not rivers. But after you attain enlightenment, mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers. It's kind of like that. Psychologically, sonata form, and I realize it could take a lot of listening to kind of apprehend it this way, but it's psychologically a profound thing.
I want to say something about the terminology, which is I feel like classical music terminology is just extremely difficult and illogical, kind of, because when you're talking about sonata form and you just explained that, it's like one thing and then you go somewhere else and then you come back. However, we're in a piece of music that is called a sonata as the umbrella term, but this is one movement of
right.
the sonata, and then the next movement of the sonata will also be in sonata form, or not.
Or not in this case. No, I realize that. The many meanings of the word sonata are vexing and kind of annoying, and you just have to get past it. I mean, we are listening to a sonata. The first movement and the third movement happen to be although they don't have to be, but they are what's called sonata form.
This is because this stuff is old and it's from a time from before communication was sort of optimized, I think.
Oh, really?
I think so. I mean, it's like now you would not ever have a term that would be popularly accepted that had like 17 different meanings like this and confused everything. Like it wouldn't be allowed.
Yeah. No, well, here we are. Okay, so as I said, we will come home. We come home at the recapitulation, which I know, again, is a very boring word, but it's a very dramatic moment when we return to the main theme, as you'll hear in a sec. So we're still in the development. And right there, what you feel, what are you actually feeling when you hear those last couple seconds? You're feeling suspense because Beethoven is working up to. And now we transition into the beautiful, sort of poignant, luminous second theme. So now we come into this sort of real passionate and again hammer blow coda, coda meaning tail. So this is sort of the wrapping up section of the movement, the culmination. I'm always a little shattered after that thing because it's just such a fireball of musical power, and particularly the musical materials, which we can't really go into here, but alternation between 1 and 5 chords, between the home key and the dominant. It's, yeah, well, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it. I can see why this was the piece of music chosen to sort of represent human passion and excess, sort of.
Yeah, I mean, certainly Beethoven surpassed it in terms of just sheer, if you want to talk about what's known as the Beethoven's heroic style.
Wait, he surpassed it later on, you mean?
Yeah, over time. And it's interesting. Well, you could see why, Tolstoy couldn't have a whole orchestra in his living room and like sort of everybody having an affair in the orchestra with everybody else in the orchestra. That's a little too far out, I think. He needed a violinist and a pianist.
Right.
And the pianist was his wife.
Well, maybe, I mean, is this a transitional piece at all from a more sort of sober style to a more romantic style? Or not really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. This is one of, I think...
This is like passion unleashed, kind of, or romanticism unleashed
well,
in the beginning? Then that would conceptually make sense. I don't know if it... I mean, I think he just heard it and liked it. Like, we know there was an anecdote. He heard it and liked it is what happened, but it seems appropriate for his point as well.
Yeah, it's perfect. It's perfect. But the question behind your question, I think, is, did Beethoven write in different styles, and why is this a style that is most apt for what Tolstoy is trying to say about music? And the reason is Beethoven is usually thought of as having 3 stylistic periods. The early period where he was still under the influence of his teachers, Haydn and Mozart, and then the middle period, which is not so much romanticism unleashed as romanticism leashed, because he takes these classical forms like sonata form, theme and variations, or whatever, and kind of puts the pedal to the metal, so to speak, and extracts from them as much individual passion and expressiveness as those forms can express, which which nobody had really done before. And as much as, I mean, me personally, given a choice between listening to Mozart and Beethoven, most of the time I'm going to choose Mozart because he's just temperamentally more congenial for me. But it has to be said that music of this intensity and ferocity, nobody had written before Beethoven, really.
This is one reason why we're a good podcasting team, is because you just said the question behind your question. Like, that's sophisticated. That's good.
Oh, yeah? You like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, not only answering the question, answer the question behind the question.
Ah, I see. Good. So I got a little cookie for that.
Yeah. So can we hear a little bit of the second one just to see why it's bad? I mean, I understand that it's actually not bad, but our man here is saying it's bad. So let's investigate and see if we think it's bad.
Our man Rosen, yeah.
I meant our man Tolstoy, but each to their own man.
Right. Got a new master, get a new man, right? That's the Caliban thing from The Tempest.
I'm not good at that.
Yeah, all right, whatever.
I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah, we'll listen to a little of the second movement. And when you end the first movement with such ferocity, it's sort of, again, like, what do you do? What do you do next? To do something very different, I think it works. And this is not the only time that Beethoven has pulled this kind of trick. For example, in the Erotics Symphony, which was written around the same time, the second movement is a funeral march. And it's titled something like "To Honor the Death of a Hero," something. It's pretty fucking intense and dark. I mean, it's a funeral march. And right after that comes the scherzo, which is just sort of pulsating with energy, but it's a sort of almost emotionless energy, sort of primal energy, without emotion. You listen to it and you're sort of like, it's totally different, but like, what else could he have done at that moment? So anyway, okay, the second movement, which is a theme and variation, so we'll just listen to the theme. And so then we begin the first variation of that theme. When you hear that theme, what's your sort of reaction to it?
I'm sort of primed to think that these two things are very different and not very relating to each other. And that's certainly what I think. I mean, the energy changes so dramatically that you do kind of wonder what's going on. And, it's like also very beautiful, but just not the same thing at all, was my feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can see that. I still cling to my belief that it's sort of absolutely the right next step.
Yeah, I'm not arguing really.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't say that I have a sophisticated opinion on it, but certainly you experience the sort of dramatic difference.
Yeah, oh, sure. No, absolutely. But I think also it's worth pointing out, I mean, Tolstoy called it weak, or maybe he didn't call it weak. Maybe it was the finale he called weak. But he, I think, described it as like mediocre or something.
One is like insipid and the other is weak. Let's see. Okay, here it is. After that allegro, they played the beautiful but common and unoriginal andante with trite variations.
Right.
And the very weak finale.
Yeah.
So that was beautiful. I said beautiful. I got one of the adjectives. But common and unoriginal and trite variations, which we didn't hear the variations, but...
Yeah, no,
we can assume they're not trite.
I don't think they're trite, but I also think that the theme is more complex than you at first hear. It's kind of proper and it's sort of deliberate and like a little bit symmetrical, almost to the point where you might think, well, it's just a tiny bit stuffy, perhaps. But I don't really think that that's true, because I think under the surface, there's poignance. There's a sort of sly wit to it. There's a combination of really sort of a radiant and kind of sunny sort of beauty of the melody, but also a sadness as well. So I experience it as having depths, but the depths are not on the surface, so to speak.
They rarely are.
Well, no, some composers...
Sometimes the depths are on the surface.
Sometimes the depths are on the surface. Well, with Beethoven, for example, sometimes the depths are... He will just hit you over the head with them,
right.
But this is not that situation.
Right. Here, I'll just read another line from the story because it's fun. It is a terrible instrument. He's talking about, I think, the piece of music itself or music itself. It is a terrible instrument in the hands of any chance user. Take that Kreutzer Sonata, for instance. How can that first presto be played in a drawing room among ladies in low-necked dresses?
I mean, personally, I think that's the optimal way to play it, but that's just me. Yeah, well, that certainly illustrates his entire attitude towards the piece, like in that one sentence.
Right.
Ladies in low-necked dresses.
Right.
You think maybe he just wasn't a breast man?
I think he was. I think he was an everything man, and thus his problem.
I
mean, I defend this story, and I love this story because I think it's, as Dworkin said, it is crazed with insight, but certainly I don't think that he has the full answers on music or sex, and there is a time and a place for a low-necked dress.
I just have to point out, there's one passage, and I read this last night, and I was very struck by it, and I'm not sure I could find it, but it's the guy speaking still in the train. And he says, it almost seems as though God got it wrong. Do you remember that?
No, but that's
yes.
Great.
And I thought, because the whole sex thing, and humanity and our paradoxes and terrible contradictions, it's just fucked up and it just doesn't hold together. And so... given that the whole thing is a religious diatribe, basically,
right.
For him to say, it's almost like God got it wrong.
Right. I mean, when you start thinking that, then what you need to realize is, no, there's something you're getting wrong. But
yes, of course.
No, it is brilliant. Well, one of the things that he thinks, or one of the ways that he tries to explain this, is by saying that women are not equal to men. So he's saying in our society, one of the reasons that sex is shameful and horrible is because women don't really have the right to choose it, and women are being objectified.
It's harder on them.
I mean, it's morally terrible on both parties, but it sort of cannot be done with dignity because the two people do not have an equal sort of balance of power, which I find very amusing because, of course, now we do have more of an equal balance of power, and Tolstoy would hate what's going on right now. So he kind of felt like sex would be cleaner and more virtuous if the women were also, after it and wanted it and could freely have sex with whomever they wanted. I think he only thought that because he couldn't imagine that such a thing was conceivable.
So to speak.
Yeah. But let's also do, I just want to hear the very weak finale.
Oh, yes, the so-called very weak finale.
Yeah, let's just finish out the course and determine if the finale is very weak.
That gets my goat. Okay.
That's as passionate as it gets on the classical music podcast. That really gets my goat.
Hey, whose side are you on here?
That's how we show that we are fusty, out-of-touch people in weird brown suits. We're both wearing brown suits right now, and we have not washed our hair in 2 weeks, and that's how you can tell we are a classical music podcast.
Well, no, if we really haven't washed our hair in 2 weeks and we're wearing like not just brown suits, but brown corduroy suits.
Yes, yes.
And possibly taking snuff, then we are not only classical music people, but we're like medieval classical music people. That's when it really gets scary.
I don't even want to know these distinctions. The more you know about these distinctions, like the lower your cultural status sinks.
Ouch. Okay, the weak finale. Okay, let me just say, that's not weak. Now, I'm being facetious, and you could say, that's just one chord. What are you talking about? But the beginning matters. How you begin a work, it does matter. And anyway, we'll continue. So I would say that there's going on there a almost sort of primal energy, devoid of any sort of sentimentality, almost devoid of emotion, but just sort of pure, you might say, the music's delight in itself. I don't know. I just think that's fucking fantastic.
Yeah, I do too. It's fantastic.
It's great.
Right. I mean, I do understand the sort of amorality of it, I guess.
Oh, I don't even mean from that. I just mean like from a musical standpoint, if you say, well, that's weaker than the first movement, then you're just misunderstanding what it's trying to do.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, no, yeah. I would actually totally agree with that. But I'm just saying that I feel like this kind of almost bloodless, like, now we're going to do what music can do kind of feeling. I mean, it is stripped away from those deeper human emotions that we saw in the first piece, but it's fantastic. And I think hearing that third part, I can agree with you that he's exploring one thing in 3 different ways.
Cool.
Ta-da.
Yes. Although I will note that you used the word horny a lot more than I did in this podcast.
I'm trying to spice it up. I feel like the listeners need it.
Yeah, you're right. After
you know?
that fusty classical music.
Exactly. I mean, we want them to feel like there's something to look forward to here. We are a society of vain pleasure and egotism, and let's not forget it.
Yeah, that's right. The corduroy suit, just don't cut it.
Exactly. I wonder if we have a final word from Andrea Dworkin. That would what?
That would be great. It's always great to get a final word from Andrea Dworkin.
We should end every podcast with a final word from Andrea Dworkin.
And now Andrea would like to...
I mean, Dworkin really leans into the killing, which is not my favorite part of the story.
Yeah, no.
Is not to my mind the most significant part of the story. I mean, I feel like the murder at the end is a sort of rhetorical device rather than the reality of it. No, this is good. Okay, final word from Andrea Dworkin.
Here we go. Ready, folks?
In art, she's talking about Tolstoy. In art, he articulates with almost prophetic brilliance the elements that combine to make and keep women inferior, all of them originating, in his view, in sexual intercourse. because sexual intercourse requires objectification and is therefore exploitation. Fini.
Wow. Well, there you go.
Your fault. All of it. Your fault.
Have a great evening, folks. Enjoy yourselves, so to speak. And I think this has been Fretful Porpentine. Is that right?
Fretful Porpentine, the podcast. See us in another 4 to 6 months.
Hopefully much sooner than that. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.